Hey listeners, welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. Today we have Dr. Pedram Shojai, a multifaceted wellness expert known as the Urban Monk, a former Daoist monk and doctor of Oriental medicine. Pedram integrates Eastern wisdom with modern life. He is the founder of Urban Monk Productions, a New York Times bestselling author of books like The Urban Monk and The Art of Stopping Time, and the producer of documentaries such as Vitality, Origins, and Prosperity. Dr. Shojai's work empowers individuals to achieve balance, vitality, and purpose in today's fast-paced world. Let's start with your journey from a Daoist monastery to urban life, from monk to modernity. I'd love to start with that monastic experience. Bring us a little bit into what brought you into a monastic way of life, and how has that shaped your approach in a more sort of professional domain as you've come to be known as the urban monk?
Yeah, it kind of came full circle. The monastic life was not the beginning of it. I was there's mountain monks and fire monks, and I was a fire monk, which meant I wasn't going to drop out of UCLA. I was pre-med at the time. I was really interested in this Jedi stuff, but not enough to throw away the dreams of my immigrant parents, kind of thing. And started training 30-something hours a week with Kung Fu master, doing Tai Chi, Qigong, all the really interesting practices that come with the lineage. And then as I became a monk, they helped. It helps, or it doesn't help, but it helps that the temple didn't exist anymore. It got burned down by the communists. So the Grand Master was here and not there because everyone else was killed. And so that's what the Cultural Revolution brought to China. Thank you very much. And so I got to train with the last living descendant of the monastery here in Los Angeles, California, his senior students until he passed. And then they would send me with letters of intro when I'd go on sabbatical once a year for 3 months to different countries. And so got to sit and study with many masters around the world, but did a lot of work while here, crossing fists, as we say in the martial arts tradition, all the way to healing, energy work, and then he'd say, okay, here's a practice. Go find your way out into the wilderness where no other humans are and do this for 3 weeks. Come back and tell me what you find. And you go dig at the bottom of your next breath, right? And so it really helped come full circle, because as I came back, I was in the Himalayas, and monk life it's different, right? But it's also great in the way that you're not worried about the world. You don't have bills, you don't have relationship trauma. I mean, there are a lot of the things that the world throws at you that noise is silenced so that you can listen to a different bandwidth, if you will. But when I was there, I could feel that I didn't belong. And speaking with one of the masters, I was in India, I was in Rishikesh at the time. He's like, man, you don't belong here. Go back. You speak good English. You're well educated. Take this to your world. And that re-entry was painful, because try going to Los Angeles, California, and telling a busy lawyer who's also got kids, who's also stuck in traffic, that they're not spending enough time meditating when they barely have time to put creamer in their coffee. And I realized that there was a fundamental misread of all these scriptures, and just kind of the translation from east to west is those are ascetic lineages. And I was trying to teach ascetic practices to householders. And 99% of the people are householders. Like, we got stuff going on. And so if you got stuff going on, you can't live that lifestyle. So how do you bring that lifestyle into your busy lifestyle and optimize it? And that became the work for several years, just finding ways to integrate what actually works from that world into the world that I live in. And I became a householder. I have a family. I got dogs. I got kids. I got it all. And, when the rubber hits the road, what works is what sticks.
Who was that last living descendant? Tell us a little bit about that master.
Sherke Lu. Master Lu was a young man. He was off property, visiting another monastery, the Yellow Dragon Monastery in Canton. And he was off property, and the communist army showed up and burned down the temple, killed everyone he knew, imprisoned and tortured a couple of his contemporaries until they died in prison. And, because he was off property, they're like, yeah, you're with us. And they smuggled him out, put him on a boat to Chinatown, San Francisco. And he came over, and then a few years later came down to Los Angeles. And, the community kind of watches out for those guys, right? And so they're like, oh, here's a esteemed Daoist master from a temple. And they find a use for guys like that, right? And so he was in that world. And my main teacher became his first non-Chinese student. They really, the fist is closed. They really don't share the good stuff with the non-Chinese. And he kind of broke ranks and was like, listen, why not? And so he started teaching for non-Chinese back in the late 60s. And so that became my primary Kung Fu master. And then I ended up studying with the old man for years.
And what was it like to study under him? How was that container set up? What was the structure of that sort of transmission or that teaching in terms of how you sat with him and the process that unfolded from that?
Yeah, not the way you would envision it, right? Because we envision all the monk stuff here as, happy huggy and, lots of bliss. And man, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I was doing a lot of Kung Fu. There's a lot of serve the master and, pick him up and take him to lunch and, rake this guy's front yard and a lot of service, because in the temple, that's what you do. But it's also, I'm obviously not culturally Chinese. And there was a lot of honestly, the first couple of years, it's like, man, this guy's grumpy. And he just wouldn't put up with anyone's bullshit. And, here you are trying to tell him about yourself. And there was a lot of humble pie you eat when, the teaching is nobody cares about you. Why are you talking about you? Who are you anyways? Why is there an I in the room? Right. And, their teaching style was very different from a person who grew up in the West. And yet the results of what the training did were undeniable. And you're like, whoa, what was that? And so you're like, okay, I want to learn this. And so you humble yourself, you work. I mean, the literal translation of Kung Fu is hard work. And when you learn that all life is Kung Fu, then you stop moaning about things and you just get to work. And so I had to learn the hard way. And we looked at Kung Fu's, I was doing 30 hours of, there was so much sweat. I would have to change twice every day just in the training that we did. And so we had to strengthen the vessel so that it would be a container for the internal work that we were learning. And he would teach the internal work, and very piecemeal, because like anyone else, I was pre-med UCLA. I was a smart guy. And I'm like, all right, let's just cut these corners and give me that. That's what I want. Right. And that's not how it works. Right. And so, fast forward to, music festival spirituality, and a lot of things that I find troublesome in our current culture is that, everyone wants the experience but won't do the work. So the container cannot contain, process, digest, and metabolize the learnings that come from this type of work.
Well, and the point that you brought up about householder versus ascetic, this is something that I had explored a little bit in my first Vipassana. They set a similar frame where, there are people who are monks who come into the monk way of life. That's why they've set up Vipassana the way that you have, so you can experience that. But when you go back into this sort of householder environment, it's a different context, it's a different environment. And so how do you sort of stabilize in some of these higher enlightened states, but still hold the complexity of paying bills and raising kids and working a job and all these other things? And sort of what I heard you say is, with your example of the busy lawyer, it can be very difficult to have even 10 minutes to meditate, much less, an hour or 2 hours a day to do active practice and active work. So I'm curious, as you came out of this monk mode and into, let's say, householder mode, what did you notice were useful or effective ways to teach presence and being and enlightenment even to householders and people who were quite busy with their everyday life?
Yeah. It's the question of our time, right? And really, the essence is, I like to frame it as saying, look, if you can't tap into that and build momentum for yourself in the still water, you're not finding it when the water goes white, right? And the day starts to pick up in velocity, time picks up in velocity, and you're tumbling in the white water. Then, everyone's trying to meditate off a panic attack. That's not what that stuff's designed for, right? And so Vipassana is a great example. You take a 10, 11 day jump start into going, folding your awareness inward and becoming aware of your inner state and your reactivity and your incessant need to react to the noise and all of it, right? And Vipassana is one of my favorites. And then hopefully that kind of sets the table for you to carry the momentum of awareness into your day-to-day. And I put it to householders who are listening that we have been looking at this stuff all wrong, right? It's like, oh, hey, I'm going about my day and I'm feeling a little anxiety. I'm feeling a little tired. I'm feeling this. Let me go double click meditation, open the app, do some stuff, feel a little better, and then go back to my day. And I think the way that this has been taught and has been mistranslated is it's almost like a virus checker. It should be running in the background all the time. It's like, okay, how aware am I of my posture as I'm sitting here right now? How aware am I of my breath while I'm carrying this conversation? How aware am I of my mood and, the last time I ate a meal? And so that those layers of awareness along multiple areas of perception are what they're what these things entrain. And the practice on the cushion is just to get you better at being able to tap into that state and at least attempt to stay there more often throughout your day, right? But you should live there, not visit there. Then, as a busy lawyer, you're practicing all day, right?
And it almost feels like there needs to be some initial inertia or momentum in that way, that the 10-day Vipassana is a really good example of, okay, when you go to the 10-day Vipassana, you sit for 10 hours a day, you sort of strengthen a muscle, and then you go back into your everyday life, and they recommend, you should be sitting for an hour every morning and an hour every evening as a householder if you want to maintain this sort of elevated, open, aware state. When I came out of the Vipassana, it was like I did that for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then I was sort of back to, okay, I'm going to sit still for at least like 15, 20 minutes on the cushion as a way to start, but I wasn't still able to kind of deepen those threads that I had opened up as part of Vipassana. And so it almost feels like a little bit, I think about this in psychedelics too. There's often like we have this high dose experience and then maybe we microdose or maybe we have these practices that keep us grounded. When you thought about the real world application of that, what's the balance between these intense peak experiences and the actual, daily practice of it? Is there sort of a protocol or a way that you think about the relationship between those two as people are weaving this into their everyday?
Yeah, and the answer I'm going to give people aren't going to like because everyone's looking for some biohack, right? Like, it's urolithin A, that fixes it, right? Like there's always some like magic Hail Mary that everyone wants to hear about that just takes them out of the requirement of feeding that meter every day, right? And I like to say, do it, like say your Vipassana is a great example. You should have done that every day for 100 days to build the habit. And then the question is on day 101, are you done? No, now you just have a better habit and it's part of your lifestyle. And so assembling your days around dedicated acts of self-love and feeding your resilience and your vitality and your soul every single day in a way that then allows you to kind of be like a hot knife through butter in this reality that is unfolding. And it's just a quantum manifestation and you're emanating. And so the chaos you see around you is the chaos that you bring into the room. And so those things become critically important in being able to live an intentional, clear lifestyle. Now, one can argue when we start to play Let's Make a Deal that 2 hours a day is pretty excessive. And one would agree, maybe, right, that is the case if you're, you got kids and you got whatever you got, right? And so maybe the answer for you and like coming out of Vipassana, it's like, yeah, if you want to live in like, happy monk vibes, sure. So maybe the answer for someone coming out of Vipassana and playing Let's Make a Deal is 20 minutes every morning, every evening is something that you could sustain. I personally, being in the land of Let's Make a Deal with people who are busy, would say, I think it's better for you to do 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening and keep going than try to say I'm going to do an hour and make it for 20 days and then bail because it's just unsustainable. So I think the answer is find something that's sustainable for your current time budget and what your actual commitments are in the life that you've already agreed to live. And I call it the life garden, right? Like you got to water these plants. These is what you said is important to you. And so obviously don't water weeds, but then as you start to kind of move forward, really evaluate the plants that need water and move more and more emphasis on self-care and self-love when you're not, failing or bailing on commitments that you've made, right? That doesn't feel good either. That's not right. And so, look, you start turning the ship around, you start doing things that are good for you. Every day gets a little easier. I just think that, again, just like the Hail Mary, biohacks, I think we're all trying to tear down the edifice of everything all at once. And that doesn't necessarily work in a life that has momentum and commitments. And so, we got to get real about it too.
Yeah, this inertia that we bring in, I think of it as like an inertia or a patterning that there are tools that are accessible to us that allow us to see outside of that pattern or step outside of that inertia. But there actually have to be, we have to be intentional with how we choose to spend our time every day in managing even our energy. And that's something that I wanted to sort of transition into is at the beginning, you mentioned there's mountain monks and there's fire monks, and you're trained and you are much more of a fire monk. And so whereas with mountain monks, I think more of these kind of states of being, if you will, but that are more neck up in terms of enlightenment and presence and connection to a non-dual. When I think of a fire monk, it's much more about how we manage, let's say, our burn rate or our energy and vitality. And I'd love if you could talk a little bit about, what is our relationship to our energy, if you will, or even our physical energy or vitality. How does that play a role in this practice of becoming more aware and present and committed to, doing what we can do on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think there's a pretty apt metaphor that the Daoists use, and Chinese medicine uses it too, as we call the Jing, the Qi, and the Shen, the essence, the energy, and the spirit. And a metaphor would be if the Jing were the candle, the wax of the candle, the actual fire is the Qi, the energy, and then the afterglow or the aura is the Shen. And so life becomes a process of refining our burn rate, to use your words, to optimize our energy flow and expression so that we have enough left over to bask in the afterglow that, say, the mountain monk gets more of than the fire monk, and using that to kind of fold our awareness inward. And as we become more self-aware, it becomes a self-perpetuating deal. And we could get into the pineal and the activation of the anterior cingulate cortex and all sorts of cool stuff that reflects pretty clearly along the lines of what the Taoists were saying, what we're finding in the neuroscience. But as you become more self-aware and you start kind of folding your attention, becoming more aware of your multiple senses, that also seems to be activating regions of the brain and turning on the activity of the pineal gland. And now you have more endogenous DMT and more psychedelic experience and all these things that are kind of attributed and siloed to the different areas that people are talking about here. I think it's all the same thing. And so managing your energy allows you to pay your body's bills. It allows for your immunity to function. It allows for your muscles to grow and increase ATP and build the vitality of the system. And if you have enough vitality to leave a little bit of profit, then you could bask in the afterglow and actually have time for spiritual experiences and contemplative experiences instead of robbing Peter to pay Paul just because you're trying to feel better. And I think most people who are just robbing Peter to pay Paul are getting stuck in spiritual circles and trying to do kind of Hail Mary practices to circumvent some of the work or, not feel some of the things that hurt inside. And I've never seen that work, right? They, they join cults, they get lost, they get taken advantage of. And so I see a lot of crap in the industry, if you will, of personal development. And I got nothing. I'm just honest, right? And so I think that there are a lot of pitfalls on this journey that people need to be aware of and wary of the promises. If you feel like someone's trying to sell sugar cereal to children and you're that kid, right, then it's probably not what's best for you. It's probably just a shortcut or a hack that's being sold to you.
And so this brings us even to the topic of this podcast, where we talk a lot about psychedelics, because they can often fall into that realm of this shortcut towards enlightenment. There's a state that's opened up, but at times it can cause more sort of chaos or confusion than actually help. And so as you've seen psychedelics emerge over the last, especially 5, 6, 7 years, what are some of those pitfalls that you think are quite common with people who are getting into ayahuasca and, psilocybin mushrooms and MDMA? Like, what are you noticing specific to that domain that you think is maybe troublesome or not necessarily talked about enough?
Yeah. I appreciate that question. It's a big question. And so we could spend 3 days talking about that. But, I think a lot of the training of the contemplative experiences has a lot of prerequisites. I had my teeth kicked in for like a good decade before I was taught some of the stuff that opens up the consciousness in a way that could be potentially dangerous. And so I see a lot of ego of these like CEOs who think they're God and all sorts of weird shit that happens in that industry as people start to become aware. And so without the proper tethering to humility and understanding of where you're coming from and maybe becoming a little egoic, I've seen people really go south in that. I also feel like there's a lot of male dominated ideology and it's just, tech bros have kind of stumbled into the space. And I think it's very dismissive of women and the female energy that is Aya. And I think that I just need to speak to that, in terms of reverence to mother. It and the female energy just runs differently. It's not egoic and it's more inclusive. Outside of that, the flash in the pan spirituality epidemic, I don't think is helping people as much as it could, because there needs to be better integration therapy. Listen, a lineage carrying shaman who is also proven to be ethical. Just because your dad was a shaman doesn't mean you're not capable of raping someone, right? I've seen nasty things happen.
Right. Totally.
But the lineage bearing shaman who knows what they're doing and is ethically doing it and is helping people integrate and come through from through journey to post can radically help transform a life if they manage the stewardship to allow the person to understand that it was them, their pain, their suffering, their transformation, and their learning, and not take credit for the damn thing. Right now, there's also really good therapy and all sorts of, the Western side is kind of coming over, and there's a lot of integration therapies I've seen help a lot of people. And I've also seen incredible amount as humans, right? I've seen a lot of abuse. I've seen a lot of ego, and I've seen a lot of things go wrong. And so it's wild, wild west, right? Am I a fan of psychedelics and psychedelic assisted therapy? 100%. I've seen better results with this than anything medicine's had to offer for decades. And now I'm a grain of salt kind of guy, right? Which is do it right. And if you're going to do it casually, eat the mushrooms on a hike, not at Disneyland. I mean, there's just rules that, you know what I'm saying? There's rules that you would follow to keep yourself safe. I think that there's a lot we now understand in the realm of neuroception and the safety signaling that needs to be there for you to then be able to have a proper integrative experience and not feel unsafe, which is probably not going to help. And so setting the table and doing it correctly, I think, is 80% of the battle. And then taking that along with you to then not turn the experience into the actual lesson and use the experience to understand that you have now pushed the limitations of your own belief system, and that is a place inside your psyche that you were able to access respectfully with a crutch. Now, how do you get there again, or get to a similar state, not there because you don't want to grasp, in a realm of possibility and transformation without trying to feel like last week's trip was, everything, right? Because that's also suffering. So there's a lot there. I think that there's a lot of nuance to this. And I appreciate your voice in this industry. I appreciate, the work that people are doing to make this a grown-up thing, because it was, when it lurks in the shadows, all sorts of bad things happen. So bringing it out and talking about it, I think really helps bring adult professional conversation, and not to the point where, the Western guys want to take over everything, right? It's like, I'm a psychiatrist. This is my realm. Yeah, but you're an unhappy human. So why should I listen to you? So there's, I think that there's a lot of room in the middle for all these areas to come together, for people to grow.
Yeah, one question that's coming up for me is, and something I've been reflecting on a bit lately, has been the role of the nervous system in holding some of these experiences that are unfolding, or these experiences of deep, profundity or enlightenment. And I'd be curious to hear you riff a little bit on that. Like, what is the role of the nervous system and the nervous system's capacity in these states of enlightenment that are unfolding, especially with your background in Kung Fu and sort of, Taoist teaching, but also you're a doctor. You're actively involved in helping to support people's healing and transformational process. What role does the nervous system play, and the capacity of the nervous system play in this process?
Yeah, I would even take a step further back and say, if you have a torn gut lining and you have dysbiosis, good luck meditating, good luck sleeping. And so when you start looking at neuroception and you start looking at safety signaling, the problem is, look, my body doesn't speak English, so it talks to me in unrest. I don't feel at ease. Was that the cheese burrito I ate when I knew I am, sensitive to dairy? Was that what mom said 30 years ago? Was that the dude wearing the Italian cologne that walked in the elevator next to me? Maybe all of it, right? And so the body will react to toxins, exotoxins, in a very overt way and say, I don't feel safe because there's some chemical I don't like. The body will react to endotoxins and lipopolysaccharides jumping the gut barrier and making you feel unsettled and unsafe. And all of those bring up a very central concept of arousal. There's an alarm bell ringing at your gut lining. There's an alarm bell ringing when your gut is inflamed in your brain. And so the gut-brain axis makes people live in a state of dis-ease if they're not well. And so how do we manage around this? Look, I spent a lot of time trying to get people to meditate through states like this, and realized I can't do shit if they're drinking the Dr. Pepper coming into my office. And so I've really come full circle on the temple, right? And saying, look, you got to take care of this vessel. I mean, there's a very important diet pre-ayahuasca, right?
Right.
High in serotonin, bring down the inflammation in your gut. And so there's a reason for this. And so I feel like most people going into this work, if you are to properly detoxify your system, clear heavy metals, and heal your gut lining, then your nervous system comes down from, say, DEFCON 3 to DEFCON 1, and then you have much better opportunities to explore and integrate and not blow a circuit and not be overwhelmed by this. Now, there's a million other ways to, is he getting enough magnesium? How's his sleep? I mean, there's a lot of ways to assess the overall state of an individual before they go into an experience like this. The challenge I face with this is a lot of individuals who have been failed by and have failed the traditional healthcare system start to say, okay, well, I'm just going to go do this other stuff over here because, Bob said it helped him. And there are areas where Bob is okay and you're not, and you're trying to have the same experience that Bob had, but your gut lining is torn or your childhood trauma is different. And so I just think that this needs to really get personalized. And I think that in the future, the practitioners that really know what they're doing help clear and strengthen the vessel, including the nervous system in a very profound way, before they allow for some of this higher order gamma coherence type of work to come. Because if the nervous system cannot integrate it, you're just shaking up the snow globe, but you're not really able to grow from it. It'll just be more unsettling. Like if your checkbook wasn't balanced last week, this week it's going to be worse, right? Because you're not on earth as much. And so, and again, being a big fan of this type of medicine, I don't want to be a bucket of ice water. I just want it to work for people. And I think that setting the table correctly makes for a better meal.
And there's often a conversation of what comes first, because sometimes making these, let's say, dietary changes, if you will, requires a massive shift in behavior. And so I know, like for some clients or some individuals, they may start with something like ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and that opens up this awareness of, okay, like I'm not really taking good care of myself. I really need to make some substantive changes to my lifestyle, to my diet, to my exercise. And what I found is sort of a good rule of thumb here is, it's like, I got this from Stephen Kotler when he talks about flow. It's like, what's the 4% rule? So you're not trying to overwhelm your system or push your system way past what it's comfortable, but there is maybe an ability or capacity to stretch a little bit beyond that comfort zone and actually start to shift some ingrained patterns and behaviors in a way that, again, your nervous system can hold. Because if we push past that and just blow it out, like, if someone just dives right into drinking ayahuasca or a high dose of 5-MeO DMT, it can often be re-traumatizing or, set someone back months, if not years, in their process of healing or growth or whatever that is.
100%. And listen, I agree with you in that if you don't give a glimpse of a better reality, people will stay in their humdrum patterns and never come out. And so I think the best I can say on this is it's kind of a game of leapfrog, where you can take little bites and look a little further, but don't forget to bring your body along for the journey. And, I was fortunate to have been able to experience some of this stuff early, like saying, in our late teens, early 20s, and the body starts to break. A lot of folks come to this stuff in their 40s, 50s, and 60s after a life of, good old fashioned American living. And it creates, I think, a lot of problems where they're not well. It's their gut lining is torn. They have more toxicity. They have more issues. The fundamentals of their vitality are, their fuse isn't as long. And so it's a little trickier, right? It's not like society's getting better. We're getting more and more poisoned. We're getting more and more stressed. There's more EMFs. Who knows, right? And so there's a lot of factors in your body being in disarray. And there's a lot of factors that would lead to a very bad trip or a bad experience that, I don't know, cathartically might be better for you in the long run. But if you're trying to punch through some barriers and grow, you want to do so in a way where you could always integrate behind it, right? Sun Tzu, Art of War, right? Like if you're like the bold general who like charges against the enemy army, and you look at him go, and he turns around and his army's 2 miles behind him, and he gets encircled and he gets his ass kicked. I don't know if that really helped, right? And that's I think what happens a lot in the psychedelic space is you get way far, you get past your supply lines, and then you're in trouble, and then you got to spend a lot of time licking your wounds. I just don't see those people moving forward as well as the people who take measured steps and grow and integrate and learn.
Yeah, I love that reflection. It's like, don't bite off more than you can chew. And part of the challenge, I think, with how Wild West the psychedelic space is a lot of people don't know how much is too much to bite off. And this is why even I've emphasized again and again is there may be value in, microdosing or doing very low doses of this work before you try to climb and see the mountaintop from above, that this is often a process that, like you experience in your training, it can take years. And some people just want the magic bullet. They want the quick fix. They want something that's going to help today, which is like, I wouldn't blame those people, because some people they're very depressed or very anxious, or they're going through these big challenges. So it's like, how do you still in those states be able to see things from a clear eye? And I think that's where having really ethical and trained practitioners and medical doctors and people that we can trust who can help us make really good informed decisions is paramount to the success for the individual.
I think there's something in that just came to mind as you were speaking, if I may. I think a lot of people coming to this space are trying to feel better, right? I don't feel well. I'm in a state of dis-ease, and I want to use this because I heard it's cool to feel better. Whereas, and I look at that as a doctor, like Dr. Pedram, not Monk Pedram, looks at that and says, okay, well, let's figure out why you don't feel well. Are you toxic? Is your adrenals out? Are you not sleeping well? Let's get to the root cause of why you're not feeling well, and let's alleviate that. Because to me, and this is, my humble opinion, is I kind of go Ramana Maharshi on this, in that the real question is, who am I? And the better question is, who just asked that question? And that type of inquiry, with the use of psychedelics and mind-altering, mind-opening elements, I think leads to the true work, versus something that is being used in a remedial way to make you feel better. And so I think people coming in to use the medicine to feel better aren't quite at the altar of the work. The altar of the work is, how can I die to my eternal self and become a self-realized being? And what is lying between me and that? And those are the things that you burn on the funeral pyre. And again, this is my personal take on all of it, right? But unless you're coming at this work at that level of inquiry, I think you're wasting the drugs. And I think you're creating a lot of noise in the channel.
And so what I hear in that is there are a lot of fundamental things that need to be dialed in just on a physiological level. And potentially even a psychological level before there's a choice to reveal the mountaintop of who we really are. And I think the hard truth is, some people come in with a lot of trauma or a lot of backlog or, a very toxic lifestyle for many, many years. And there are other folks who are, like, I consider myself very fortunate in that, 19, when I was doing LSD, I was well equipped enough, both physically and psychologically, for that to immediately open up. And it's, as you mentioned before, it's very personalized and different for everyone. But knowing those sort of basic physiological and basic psychological things are handled and taken care of, I think is important. And it's why, on a personal level, I have a lot of community in the psychedelic space, but it's why I've been so drawn to the health and wellness and the biohacking space, because, if you're not healthy from the neck down, then it's just a lot of wasted energy and effort to take these drugs. And it's often not that productive and sort of counter-helpful.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And look, the flip side of that is we are now in kind of an unprecedented era where someone who does, say, have really nasty trauma and ACE scores that are not healthy and all that, can go to a psychedelic assisted therapy place that's prominent with people that are respectable and do the right work, and really punch through and make massive gains in this realm of psychological disease with someone who knows what they're doing, that'll help them, put Humpty Dumpty together again, proverbially, right? And then in that, create a baseline of self-worth and vitality for this individual to then start kind of growing as a spiritual being and all that. So I don't want to dissuade somebody who's suffering from seeking out the work with the right guidance. I just think that what you think you're getting and what you want out of the medicine needs to be in line with what the medicine is really here for, or at least has traditionally been here for. And listen, there's a lot of off the reservation things that are happening now, but I can tell you, going on my 50th year, that the success stories usually have to do with measured steps and quality individuals, professionals in the space, whether it be a shaman or a doctor, who can really help you co-create a container until you could be the container.
Right. It's like the scaffolding for your health and well-being until you're sovereign enough and sort of anchored enough that you can actually take on that responsibility fully yourself, which is where we want to be. When we talk about functional health or integrative health or psychedelics, it's like we do want to be our own sort of sovereign vessel and be able to come from that place. But sometimes we need a little help and support to actually get there and really stand up on 2 feet and take on the world as it is, rather than, the sort of fuzzy lens through which we often see it.
Amen. Yeah, and we live in a world filled with media messaging and an attention economy that is all designed to extract your agency, right, and your attention away from you and into what the highest bidder wants. And so it ain't easy. It ain't easy, but it's the only game in town. And so waking up and becoming enlightened to that, I can't think of a more apt use of your heartbeats than waking up to who you truly are.
So before we close today, I'd love to hear you just riff a little bit on like what it means to be a Jedi biohacker in today's day and age. What does that phrase mean to you, and what do you think it represents? And if you could, even weaving in some of this sort of Daoist lens, because Taoism and the Tao Te Ching has been a really influential part of my path. I think there's a lot of wisdom there. And I'm curious, like, how you see this relationship between Taoism, the sort of archetype of the Jedi, and these sort of modern health and wellness practices that are starting to emerge as cutting edge in many ways.
Yeah. I think the modern stuff always needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because unless there's a way to create a patent or a trademark, there's no money in it. And so I think there's just a lot of device talk and deification and edification of gadgets that are new. I've spent much of my life doing Daoist practices, coordination of eyes, mind, body, and breath, circling the hands in different, it's like EMDR before EMDR was a thing, and a lot of time in nature integrating that Schumann resonance inside of my own biosphere. And then fortunately, because I owned clinics and, was a householder that got good at it, I was able to open a brain lab and hire guys to be like, hey, what the hell's happening here? Study this. And so we've really come to understanding that there are states of being that allow for you to live in that space. And the more we can layer, say, our exteroception, right? Like I feel the touch, I feel the cold, I have this pressure on my body, I could feel it. My interoception, like I could listen to my breath, I can hear my heartbeat, I can follow my heart rate, and then balance and proprioception, equilibrioception. So all of these different areas, there's at least 9 different areas of data streams that my anterior cingulate cortex, right behind my pineal gland, are designed to take. And the more of those that I could learn to be aware of at the same time, the more I can layer my awareness. And if you think about Vipassana, right? Great example. You're feeling the air passing here. So you're feeling it on the skin. You're listening to the breath. You're observant of the pains, right? Like how many of these areas of perception are you being trained to be aware of at the same time? And then what is that doing to fold your attention back inward And that leads to The Secret of the Golden Flower, the work of Lu Dongpin. Lu Dongpin was the founder of the Yellow Dragon Monastery's lineage. And all this work is all about folding your awareness back inward and becoming aware. And as you become aware, the lights turn on. And so the original technology around all of this required no technology. It required you becoming aware, hyper aware of what's happening in the real moment, in a world that is trying to pull your awareness out towards TikTok or whatever it is every moment. And so the Jedi practices the Jedi Knights, I mean, it's obviously, fictional stuff, but it was based on the Pillar of Jed and the celestial pillar of ancient Egyptian energy medicine and the Merkaba and all sorts of really and so when I asked Sifu Lu, and the guy didn't have a hippie bone in his body, right? Barely spoke English. You take him to dim sum, multiple nights, and you once in a while you get an answer out of this guy. But I was like, Sifu, what is this? Like, where did this come from before Lu Dongpin? Like, where did this amazing practice come from? And he looked at me, not a smirk, not a weird look in his body. He says, well, Atlantis. Like, excuse me? So there seems to be a pass-through of an underlying ancient spiritual technology that after some great flood landed in Egypt and ancient China and Tibet and some of these places, and obviously, the high Peruvian Andes, that then became these lineages that were then passed on through monasteries. But in this old man's understanding of where his Chinese Taoist system came from, he said Atlantis. And I'm like, Atlantis, like the island that sunk? And he's like, yeah, that one.
I did not expect this, Pedram. Like this, that.
Neither did I. Neither did I, Paul. I mean, it kind of blew my hair off, right? I was just like, wait, what are
literally,
you saying? What are you saying? Like you think like some new age tripper would say something like that. And so that was what he knew the roots of this system were before they got to China. And so all I tell people is I'm a scientist. I never tell people to believe in anything. I like the way the Buddha did it. Is there a God? I'm going to teach you how to observe your breath and look inside, and you tell me. And so everybody I've ever taught this Daoist Qigong to comes back if they do it, right? If they do, it's a big if, right? Because people are distracted. If they do it for a few days, they come back and they're like, oh, whoa, what was that? Like, yeah, keep digging. That's the work, right? That's the work. And that becomes the eternal elixir. You keep looking inward and finding the inner light. And as the inner light becomes more emergent, you start to connect better and better with they call it the immortal elixir, but it is that light and that awareness and the vitality and the happiness and the gnosis are all tied to the same state of being somehow. And when you do it and when you practice it, you're like, yeah. And look, in a deep state of psychedelics, right? You could heal lots of things. What is that state? It's the state of possibility. It's the realm of quantum unfolding. I don't know, whatever words don't really describe it well, but when you're in that state, you know that there's something different. You're in this place of co-creation, maybe, right? Like, and again, that's a word that's loaded, but there is something very juicy there. Now, how can you live there and not just visit there on, 3 tabs of acid? And that becomes the work.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things about what you just said, but what you just said, I had a guest on a few years ago who has been, in a way, resuscitating this ancient Greek practice of telos and working with mushrooms in a way where he'll actually stare at the sun, and or work with the sun. I'm not going to describe it super well, but I think kind of what you're speaking to is there is this source or vitality in, I mean, just from a physical level, the sun and how we interact with it. And the sun is often mythologically represented God in many traditions, including Ra and the ancient Egyptian tradition. And so there's a way in which when we open up into these expanded states, and this goes back into even the nervous system, we create a capacity to be able to fully receive it and allow it to nourish us. But if we are leaky, right? If we don't literally, if we have a leaky gut, or if there are sort of other energetics of us that are leaky, we actually can't absorb it. It just sort of passes through us, or it might fracture us, and so there's a way in which we have to be whole and grounded in our presence in order to be able to fully sort of receive the sort of transmission or download of this realized self, if you will.
Yes. And the vessel needs to be intact, and the ability to allow the light to burn through the shadows of your darkness and illuminate the areas where you're unwilling to look sometimes could take years, right? It's right eye, left eye of Horus kind of work. And in doing so, you become light. And as you become more aware of the inner light, the more you start to understand that the celestial light is, first of all, it's not billions of years away, it's right here, right? And you start to become much more aware of your role in this dance of the cosmos. And this is all just from the literature of what self-reported monks talk about. But all you got to do is spend enough time on your cushion, and the language of light and the unfolding of DNA with the language of photons is something Jeremy Narby talked about. I mean, there's just a lot of literature that's come along these lines. I know we're running out of time, but I don't know if you've looked at like the Egyptian practices of dark practice and what they do with that.
Like dark rooms, or is this
dark
different?
rooms? So you'd be in 10 days of complete darkness, which I highly recommend for people who are like, we've been exposed to too much light in too few time, right? We're not sleeping enough. Our eyes are open. We're ingesting too much through our eyes. But they would do this for a long time, and then they would stare at the rising sun for a few seconds and then close their eyes and let that burn through their nervous system and repattern their nervous system and reintegrate back into their body, regrow their bodies and their tissue, and all sorts of really interesting stuff from ancient practices that, again, in line with Taoist and some of the work that you're alluding to, this stuff's been here for a long time. And this stuff is like ancient tradition from Egypt, but it also went to Greece, and it's this stuff. If you start looking at it, you're like, wow, this is really sophisticated schools of thought that have years and thousands and thousands of scrolls, and really smart people doing this for a long time and workshopping it in their own bodies. There's a huge body of evidence and work through the lives of millions of monks over thousands of years that has been disregarded by the establishment that just wants you to take drugs. So, wake up and smell the matrix. We're talking about stuff on the right side of the equation here. Just be careful how you do it.
What the sort of final note that I know we're coming on time, but the final note that I'll close on is that, to me, the sort of ancient practices and scrolls and literally millions of monks, that is much more reputable and reliable than the infrared sauna and the HBOT and all of these sort of quote unquote cutting edge biohacking technologies. It goes back to sort of the theme of the podcast. How do we root in these ancient practices and these ancient ways that have longevity over thousands of years, and not just try to get hooked on another thing that is sold to us that's supposedly going to be the thing that actually heals us or changes us, And I think it is that reframe in a way that's important.
Amen, brother. If I have another man-child biohacker try to explain to me so some $30,000 device is like the answer to all my problems, I might have to just punch them, right? Like, it is ridiculous how it is a market economy and everyone's just out there. And listen, I know a lot of these people. I've been in the space. I've been quiet on purpose because I don't get involved in that, right?
Sure.
But these are not well adapted, happy, spiritually vibrant individuals. A lot of them that are touting this stuff. and you should see the houses they live in. And so again, there's a lot of bullshit out there. Sit on your cushion, observe your breath, wake up to who you are, eat good food, that costs money. But all these gadgets and stuff, everyone's just being told that this is the answer. That's just another form of idolatry. The answer is inside your own forehead. And the chemistry lab is inside your own brain. And you're a few breaths away from changing the way you feel if you understand what you're doing.
It's a beautiful way to end. You've done a lot of things. You've written books. You've done documentaries. You're on Instagram. So if folks want to follow you or learn more about you, Pedram Shojai on Instagram. Any other places you'd like to point people from our episode today?
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. TheUrbanMonk.com, my books, my films, the stuff that I'm doing. Every once in a while I do a retreat, but it's all just there. I'm less social media than I am just here's the website with all this stuff. So that's probably the best way to find me.
Great. Well, Pedram, thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself today. And this was a rich and juicy conversation, and I know the folks at home really enjoyed it. So folks, check out theurbanmonk.com. Pedram's also on Instagram, and just thank you so much for everything you shared today. It was an honor to host you.
Thank you. Really fun.
Thanks so much for watching. For a deeper dive into the power of microdosing with complimentary practice and extra guidance, check out our best-selling microdosing course. It's a science-based protocol with dozens of best practices so you can customize your protocol to your unique needs and goals. Check out the link in the description below.